Small SUVs are big business in America, especially in the luxury segment. That's why I'm actually surprised this is the first time Acura has entered the fray with the all-new 2025 ADX. This was designed to compete directly, of course, with the Lexus UX, but also the Volvo XC40, which is currently the best seller in this segment. So as we take a look around the ADX, certainly keep that Volvo in mind. Let's start things off by talking about the styling. Clearly, this is a miniaturized version of Acura's other SUV styles, but not as miniature as you might think. We'll get to that in just a moment. We, of course, have the chicane DRLs right there in the full LED headlight module, but the light pipes are not quite as elegant, not quite as expensive as the ones that we find in the MDX. Pretty logical, of course, because this is going to be a much more affordable model. This is basically going to be the entry-level Acura SUV. But all the other styling cues that I love in the Acura lineup are still here. The crisp lines, the big bold grille, the big Acura logo there in the middle, 360-degree camera below that, and I love the way that these lines all go back to that Acura logo. Of course, we find front parking sensors and the radar sensor standard because we find a lot more standard active safety tech in the ADX than we find in most of the European competition. Fun fact, our most recent long-term test purchase here at Auto Buyer's Guide was actually a Volvo C40, and with an MSRP of $65,000, higher than I expect this price tag to be, it still didn't have adaptive cruise control. You'll only find that standard on the very top end trim there. Moving our way around the side, this particular model is the A-Spec with the Advanced package, so the trims and wheels are going to change from one model to the other. This has the optional accessory wheel. The A-Spec Advanced is going to have the black shiny trim around those wheel wells. This is a new exclusive blue color to the ADX. As we come around this way, you'll notice that the roof line curves gently down towards the rear, giving this a little bit more of a long look rather than the upright and boxy look that we find in the XC40. Now, speaking of XC40 and this, the dimensions here are significantly larger. This is about 185 inches long, so it's only about 2 inches shorter than the Acura RDX. Visually, though, it looks a bit smaller because the roof line is certainly lower, giving it that stretched out look, and then we have the hatch in the back that has more of a raked appearance. Let's go over here to this white model because I think it's a bit easier to see. This white model does not have some of the accessories that blue model has on it, most notably the accessory spoiler, which certainly splits up the visual impact of the hatch design. At the top we have this sort of twin fin spoiler, but as it comes down here, you'll notice it's a pretty flat area from the glass all the way down there to the Acura logo. It definitely is reminiscent of the Integra. Of course, we find full LED taillight modules back here with amber turn signals. That's a really nice touch. And again, well-integrated parking sensors. Twin exhaust tips at the bottom, and if you come in close, you notice this is not an all-black rear bumper. So we get the shiny black section up there, we get a gray section down there, and then down here we have more of the shiny black. So it helps split up the visual impact and make this look a little bit wider. But it's still on the wide side for this segment. Certainly larger, wider, and roomier than the Lexus UX, which I do think is going to be the most direct competitor to the ADX. Back here in the cargo area, we'll take a look at this first. We get about 24 cubic feet of cargo space. This has one of the hard style cargo dividers. Let's pull that out and see what that looks like. It splits in half so that way you can fold it up and tuck it away. Under the load floor, however, there's nowhere to put it, but we do have some extra foam storage and those foam dividers. Whew, that's loud. And then we get a temporary spare tire all the way under that. And just in case you've forgotten the visual difference, here it is again with that black spoiler running across the back. Let me know whether you're pro spoiler or con. I am not usually the biggest fan of a dual spoiler, but it can work in certain designs. Now let's talk about what's going on under the hood. Unfortunately, I cannot open the hood, but we know what's happening under there. It's a 1.5 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, basically the same engine that we find in the Integra, but there have been some tweaks for the ADX, and that's why we don't know how much power it's going to make. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess it's going to be pretty similar to the 200 horsepower we find in the Integra. You'll be able to get it in front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and the only transmission on offer is going to be a CVT, so very much like the Integra. Although we don't know official fuel economy numbers yet, you can bet this is probably going to be one of the more efficient entries in this segment. It's also worth noting that we find an eCVT planetary power split system in the Lexus UX. but that also means that the UX has a standard hybrid system, which we do not find at the moment in the ADX. So fuel economy wise, UX is probably still going to be the king. And if we're comparing this against some of the European options, a lot of the European options offer all electric drivetrain options, which we're not going to see at this moment, at least in the ADX. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I would suspect that Acura is really steering towards the middle of the segment rather than trying to give us an electric drivetrain in the future. Now let's check out the interior, because clearly with a slightly lower roofline than some of the boxy upright competition, you're going to have a slightly different seating position. But the seats feel very much like the ones that we have in the Integra. Over here on the driver's side in this top trim, we do have four-way adjustable lumbar support, something that I really appreciate. We'll take a look at the passenger seat in just a moment. And even though we do have that lower roofline, we don't really have a shorter box on top. So you can still get the seat really quite upright if that's something that you're interested in. But it does look like the seating position, the floor, is actually going to be a little bit lower to the ground by default than especially something extraordinarily upright like the Volvo. The Volvo has quite a lot of ground clearance. It definitely feels like a mini 1980s boxy SUV. Hopping into the back seat, as you can see, we get tons of legroom here. So even though this is the smallest Acura, I don't think you'd have any problem fitting a rear-facing child seat behind someone about 6 feet tall. If I scoot over to the middle, we do lose a little bit of headroom because we have a bucket seat arrangement where the outboard seats are certainly lower to the ground. My head's brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling, I guess, too hard there. If you're a fan of rear seat air vents, we have a pair right there in the center console, also some USB-C charge ports, an almost flat floor there, and of course, seats that fold 60/40 style, but you'll notice to help improve cargo capacity, the seat back doesn't just fold, the seat bottom cushion articulates as well. And that's how we get that really low rear seat fold position. I'm eager to see what that does for real-world practicality, but I suspect this is going to be above average when it comes to that particular feature set. The panoramic moonroof, it doesn't go quite back there to the rear passengers' heads, but I did notice back here that we do have nice touches like full LED lighting. Going back up front, even in this top-end trim, no adjustable lumbar support for the front passenger. This segment is really dominated by all black interiors, so I'm really happy that Acura is bringing a bunch of different color options. Not just this two-tone ivory and blue interior, but also their bright red interior with black stripes. Very much the same design as this seat, only red and black. Let me know what you think about this. I think this is my favorite interior color combo. This is not a navy blue stripe. It actually is sort of a mid-blue stripe, and intriguingly, we also find blue accents inside the Volvo XC40. We have a height adjustable shoulder belt for the driver and front passenger, leather upholstery in this model, and since this is the top end trim, these leather seats are also ventilated in addition to being heated. Logically, we have plenty of hard plastics over there on the driver and front passenger doors to help improve durability. So sort of some bottle holders down there at the bottom. Leather on that armrest grip, the same sort of Alcantara-like blue stripe as we find on the seats. Plenty of soft touch materials on the upper section of the doors and on the dashboard. The dashboard design definitely has a lot of inspiration from the Acura Integra. We have basically the same touchscreen infotainment system. It's approximately 9 inches, so it is smaller than some of the options in this segment, but it's about the same size as the cluster and the infotainment system that we find in the XC40. We'll take a look at that cluster over there in just a second. This top-end trim has the built-in Google functionality. It's worth noting that you will only find that in the top-end trims. So if you want all of the built-in Googleness, you got to work up to the A-Spec Advance. Down here we have big air vents with kind of a honeycomb texture, very similar to what we find in that Integra as well. Pretty similar dual zone automatic climate controls here, heated and ventilated seats, wireless charger with some USB-C ports there. Acura has split up the cup holders. This is an intriguing design. Let me know how you think about this. This one is a pretty large cup holder with a slot so you can put your smartphone or your maybe small tablet in there. We have drive mode buttons, this drive mode toggle I should say, and then the individual drive mode button. A traditional shifter, not the Hunt and Peck shifter. And then back here, we have a bigger, squarer cup holder. So if you have things like juice boxes or those coconut water boxes or whatever, that's going to fit there a little bit more easily. Then we have a pretty big storage area. The key, that's the same as we find in the rest of the Acura lineup with the remote start button for the engine there, separate button for the trunk. And then leather wrapping not just on that cover, but also that asymmetrical side to the dashboard right there. Now moving over to the driver's side, we don't find a heads-up display over here. We just have a regular dashboard, but we do have a big full LCD instrument cluster. Don't pay any attention to the warning signs. The batteries have been draining all day long and they've had to re-jump the batteries here and there so we can film the car. The only things that are not part of the LCD are the LED gauges on each side for the engine temperature and the fuel level. Everything else is being delivered by that LCD. And it is more customizable than the LCD that we find, for instance, in the Volvo XC40. My one complaint about the XC40 is that the display, even though you have that full LCD, it doesn't really do as much for you as you might like. The steering wheel, it's a round design with a slightly flattened bottom, metal paddle shifters on the back. That's a nice touch there. Infotainment controls on this side and controls for the adaptive cruise control over there on that side. If I go ahead and open the door, you'll see that the rest of the dashboard and the door panel is kind of a mirror image of what we saw on the passenger side. We have an interesting texture to this lower section of the door. We see that in a decent number of vehicles lately. It helps reduce weight on the components while also giving it a little bit of an interesting texture. Moving up to the ceiling, we find the telematics buttons there, also the controls for the panoramic moonroof, slide to the side, sun visors, and ceiling speakers, because this now has the Bang & Olufsen audio system, something that we're seeing spreading across the Acura lineup. There's a pretty big panoramic moonroof right there. The front pane does open, and I should probably go back and take a look at those Bang & Olufsen tweeters integrated into the A-pillar. That's a design that we also see in the ZDX and the MDX, so you can bet it's coming to the other Acura models in time. I don't know how much the ADX is going to cost, but Acura has said that when this goes on sale in early 2025, it's going to start in the mid $30,000 range. So definitely less expensive than some, but I suspect when we find full pricing on this, you will discover that it's also going to be notably less expensive, especially than the European competition when comparably equipped. Remember that we get a ton of active safety systems standard on the ADX that, again, we don't find standard in a lot of the European competition. Even though the XC40 is currently the best seller in this segment, it gets pretty darn expensive if you get carried away with options. And it's pretty easy to get carried away with some of those as well. Same thing goes for the X1, the X2, the GLA, the GLB, etc. Even the Lexus UX, I suspect, is going to be a bit more expensive than this, and the UX is getting a little on the old side at this point in time. The UX is also a little on the slow side, and it's decidedly more hatchback-like than SUV-like, and I think Acura struck a different balance with the general design and especially the profile of the ADX. This doesn't have a roofline that is quite as upright as some. It is certainly a lot longer than average in this segment. Most of the competition is going to be a solid foot to 18 inches shorter, depending on exactly what you're looking for. But I think that gives this the profile you see here, that longer, sleeker look. We certainly have a longer hood, and exactly how that translates into the interior usability, that remains to be seen, but I suspect we're still going to find a slightly longer interior than some of those boxier European options. Let me know what you think about the ADX. Did Acura go in the right direction? Would you have loved to see a hybrid standard or something like that in the ADX? I have to admit that for me, that's the one thing missing in this lineup, would be some form of hybridization. Maybe something like a new Acura Performance Hybrid, that could be cool, but who knows what Acura has cooked up for the future. That could always be coming later. We just don't have any information about that at all. At launch, it's going to have just one engine, that approximately 200 horsepower, 1.5 liter turbo. It is worth noting that is going to be more power than you find in some of the competition, especially something like that Lexus UX. The Lexus UX is pretty darn slow as far as its 0 to 60 performance. The opposite for that, of course, is the fuel economy we find in the UX. It is pretty darn fantastic, something that we don't see on average in the XT4 or the XC40 or even the BMW, Mercedes, and Audi competition. So let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and what do you think a fully loaded ADX will set you back when it goes on sale in 2025?